Okay. Hello, everybody. Haywood. Haywood here. We're going to talk about using balsa blocks for portions of any fuselage. Generally, there's going to be at least one balsa wood block. Typically, I guess it's not really a typical, but they're always used. Sometimes it's in the nose section, and sometimes it's at the tail. In this case, there were two blocks. This piece above the stringer here, and between these two bulkheads, so just this top half here, that's a balsa block. And then here at the tail, we're going to have another one. We're going to use one here. So this was a 3/8 thick block, about 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. And all I did was mark it, set it on where it was going to be glued, and then draw to mark the size of it. I tapered it down because it's going to conform and basically follow this line down to the tail end of the airplane. And then trimmed it to within about 1/16 of an inch on each side. That gives us plenty of room for sanding and rounding it and contouring it and all that other happy stuff that we're going to have to do. So what I use for cutting is a razor knife or razor saw. Just kind of freehand, hold it. You can make a jig if you want, or use clamps and all that stuff. I just use the good old mandibles here, and just do it by hand. And then the balance of the shaping is going to be done with heavy sandpaper, heavy grit, like a 60 or 80 grit. And we'll chew this right down and shape it with sandpaper. So carving is one thing. I tend not to really carve anything with a blade like this. It's just the chance of injuring yourself or doing ruining the part before it gets applied. It's pretty significant. So I just cut to general form with a razor saw, and then do most of the shaping that I do with sanding block and heavy grit sandpaper. And that I use the heavy grit just to work everything down to the overall outline that we're looking for, and then begin to finish sand from that point in, to get to where we can apply the gesso and really get a nice smooth appearance to begin to apply our paint when we get to that stage now. So you can see I'm building component by component. I could lay everything up, lay up the wings, lay up the tail section, lay up the fuselage, and then start doing infilling and sheeting and planking after that. But I just work one thing at a time. This fuselage is going to be worked all the way to almost to completion. So it'll have the landing gear installed. It'll be completely prepped for paint. All of the components will be in. The cockpit will be in. All that stuff. This fuselage will essentially be done before I begin working on the wings. And that's just how I work. Everybody's different. You can work it any way you want. That's just what I choose to do. So anyway, shaping the block, just getting the rough outline, the rough shape is primary, and then you are going to stick that or adhere that in place with the adhesive. Again, I always use a CYA glue, cyanoacrylate glue. I use medium. The thin stuff is just, for me, too watery. It has applications, but because it's like an instantaneous set, and because it's so watery, I tend not to use it really much at all. The medium works for me. The thick stuff is good, and I use that sometimes for heavy structural situations, but really I've gotten away from that too, because I've discovered that once these pieces are set up with the CYA glue, if I need structural strength, I'll come back with white glue, and you'll see that part of the product when we get to a point where I'm using that, and I'll just lay that into the seams, and when it sets up, it's pretty strong. strong enough to handle just about anything. So I really don't use the thick adhesive anymore either. So the medium is, for me, the way to go. Nah, everybody's, you'll make your own mind if you decide to start doing this work or this kind of thing. So, as I was saying, let's go ahead and get this on here, and then let's see. Will I be able to begin sanding at that point? No. We still have to fit the front end here. The sheeting that I'm going to do here has to be fitted, and the bottom has to be fitted before we can start really shaping this fuselage. Anyway, let's get that block on there, and I'll do some more time-lapse stuff when that's completed. Finish up the fuselage under time-lapse. This part here will just go ahead and stick aside. And you can see we're going to give it a ton of glue. It's possible to use too much glue, but I haven't run across that situation. Unless it's running down your leg, you haven't really used too much glue. Pooling on the floor, that kind of thing. Get this thing where I want it. Alright, side to side, we're good. Top to bottom, front to back. It's a little short, but then I left this long for contouring and finishing. Yeah. Amazed how many things can be corrected on a model. Like, you can look at it and say, oh, that frame is a little this or that way, and geez, that bulge there, or that deficit or that gap or anything you're looking at on a fuselage, how am I going to overcome? I have to read. You don't really have to do much. All you're going to do filling and sanding. Just remember that's the next phase of this whole thing, and it's a big part of getting the shape right and getting everything to look the way it should, to be fair and square. I like to use that kind of terminology on an airplane. You want it fair and square, and that means when we go to set it up, the landing gear will be square and at right angles and positioned appropriately. The tail will be at right angles, perfectly aligned with the lower wing, and then the upper wing goes on last. And all that alignment, it all begins right here with square one. And again, any small deviations from perfection that you see in a rough fuselage like this can be corrected, for the most part, in shaping and sanding part of the process, in the shaping and sanding steps. So, and it's really critical that you do your best to keep everything aligned. You want to, when you're building to the plan, everything has to be pinned. It has to be right. All your angles need to be as correct as they can be. This is why building wings or fuselage formers and setting everything up, you want to use a good square, a good builder's square as you go down the line, setting these parts in, the bulkheads and so forth. It all pays out in the end when you are good enough and close enough to square. The model really looks good, and that kind of finesse, really, if there are small defects or flaws around the model, having it be fair and square in the first place tends to override anything like that an eye might catch, at 8 to 12 inch distance. And obviously, when the thing is sitting on a shelf across the room or hanging from a ceiling in a den or office, and it's all square, when someone's looking at that, and the appraisal is that that's what you want. You want that all fair and square. So, at any rate, we'll get to. I'll do a time lapse of the finishing of this, and I'll probably just take the camera outside and hang it up. And when I go in for the shaping, the overall, finished sanding of the fuselage, so you can see how that's done. Again, I use a small block for the most part. Something like this, you might use a long sanding block, one of those 7 or 8 inch sanding block, and that's to carry the line through the bulkheads here. For instance, if I use a small block like this, if there's any undulating going on here between these bulkheads, and I'm using a small block, I'm only going to enhance that error. Where a long block, something that's this long, and we start sanding this, it's going to clean that line up and straighten it. So periodically and early on in the process, both on the wings and on the fuselage, you know, you might see me using a long block initially with the coarser sandpaper, just in areas like this, where we need to have some continuity. You know, this block is going on the front here eventually, and this all has to be contoured to what's existing here. And again, a long block is going to ensure that all of these lines are being flowed, you know, evenly, and I'm not with a short block getting some of this, you know, too much rounding and losing that line because it's not, block isn't long enough. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Anyway, that's going to be in the when we get to that point. For now, I'm going to shut this off and sand this block to shape, and then we'll see how we're going to do the top forward half here and seal the bottom. We're getting close on having the fuselage itself done, and then we can begin working on the landing gear and the cockpits. Should be fun. All right.